So does Canada's bail system need an overhaul? And if so, what should it look like? Let's take that to our panel of MPs. With me tonight, Liberal MP for Vancouver Granville, Talib Noor Mohammed, and Conservative public safety critic Raquel Dancho. Hi there. Good to see you both. Thank you for coming in. I normally start with the government, but in this case, it's your motion that you're introducing. So I wanted to ask you primarily, what is the reason that you want this to happen, and what specifically are you looking for the government to do?
So there's two reasons that we chose to do this opposition day motion today on bail reform and crime. Number one is that Canadians are growing increasingly concerned about seeing these violent crime headlines every day. They're seeing it on the TTC in Toronto. They're seeing it in their communities. I think they deserve to see a change. The second reason is that we've failed to see any leadership on this issue from the federal government, and we do believe they have a very strong role to play in this, in particular with bail reform. They did reform bail with their C-75 a few years ago, and what happened was violent repeat offenders had better access to getting bail, so they were back in our communities wreaking havoc on our streets, and that's contributed to the rising crime that we're seeing, and it is real. It's 32% increase in violent crime in the last 8 years, 92% increase in gang murders. So it's not just headlines, it is in the stats, and it is very concerning. We're hearing it from police. You mentioned at the onset, the premiers, big city mayors, also nearly every police officer that I talk to, we hear this from the Toronto police, they're calling for bail reform, and we haven't seen leadership being taken on that from the Liberal government. So today we chose them to hold them accountable for that and demand action on this on behalf of Canadians.
Okay, I want to dig a little deeper in a second into the statistics that you're presenting, but let me first take your proposition over to your colleague, Mr. Noor Mohammed. Do you agree that there needs to be some reform with bail, the bail system as it stands?
Absolutely. You know, I think we have been consistent in saying that where there is room for improvement, we should. And so the work has already been done. Ministers Lametti and Mendocino have already begun conversations with their provincial and territorial counterparts. There's going to be a meeting eminently of those provincial and territorial ministers to get into this issue and to make sure that we come up with meaningful, comprehensive responses ranging from a legislative response to making sure that we are working with provinces to support them. We have to remember that many of these decisions on bail are made at the provincial level, provincial court judges in provincial courts. And so our job is to make sure that there's good public policy behind them, but that we have a comprehensive national strategy with provinces and territories at the table as active partners in getting to those solutions.
I'll just follow up on that before I go back to Ms. Dancho, and that is around the role of the provinces, because my understanding is from the reading that I've done that like a province like British Columbia, for example, decided to go a little bit stronger on the bail conditions in response to the effect Bill C-75 had. So while I understand the intent behind it, which was essentially to address some of the disproportionate minorities that were in jail, but also the overcrowding of jails, we did hear, for example, from things like the city of Kelowna, who talked about, an influx of people on the streets and the detrimental effect that was having on crime levels. And so do you concede that Bill C-75, though its intent was one thing, did not work out the way that it should have?
Well, there are provisions of Bill C-75 that were in direct response to Supreme Court decisions, right? Decisions that were made that said, look, we needed to do things differently. And there are elements of Bill C-75 that have worked extremely well, and there is room for improvement. And if you look at what British Columbia is doing and the work that Attorney General Nikki Sharma and Premier Eby have been doing, there is certainly room for improvement, but I think there's also an important consideration for how do you not try to use this as a political cudgel, right? Bill C-75 already says if you have a firearms violation, if you're a violent offender, you should not be getting bail. And those guidelines are clear. And so it's, I would say my colleague should be relieved to know that what she's actually asking for is already very much in Bill C-75. But what we need to do is to now look at how do we supplement that with all of the other things that help people prevent crime in the first place.
Okay, that sounds to me, though, that you're not really open to repealing some parts of C-75. I'll get to you in a second, Ms. Dancho. I just want to get you to weigh in. If, in fact, the stuff that you want to happen already exists, then is it even necessary to change the law as it exists? And maybe are there other supplementary things that could be done?
Well, in the Bill C-75, it's right in the bill. It makes it easier to get bail. That should be the default for the courts, for police, the least onerous conditions. It says it right in there. Minister Mendocino.
Principle of restraint.
Correct. Minister Mendocino was on the record talking about this when that bill was up for debate. So that's what the legislation says, and that's what's been done, the least onerous conditions.
But do you also understand the motivation behind it?
Well, I think when it comes to violent repeat offenders, when we're talking about rapists, murderers, murderers, people who rob others at gunpoint. I don't think anyone believes that those individuals with long rap sheets should be let out on bail weekend after
weekend. But they
weekend.
aren't really being, right? Like the most onerous crimes are treated in a certain way, even under that
Well,
bill.
the individual that you mentioned at the beginning, the murderer who murdered that police officer, was out on bail, has a long rap sheet of violent crime, had a weapons prohibition order, and yet he was out on bail, got access to a firearm, and then shot and murdered that police officer. In Vancouver, we have 40 individuals responsible for 6,000 arrests in a single year. That's each individual being arrested 150 times in a single year.
Is there a solution, though, through the province, like the new rules, basically, that the premier brought in when he was just like in BC, they did try to tamper that with their own set with their own directive. Is it possible that provinces tackle this?
We do feel that and see that provinces are trying to fill the gaps that the federal government has created with Bill C-75 and a whole host of other soft on crime policies that they've brought forward in the past 8 years. We're seeing police and provinces demanding and asking repeatedly to the federal government to do something about this and to bring forward bail reform in response to what's happened since Bill C-75. So we have a collective group of people from all different political parties, all different partisan stripes, asking the federal government to take action, and yet they failed to take leadership. In fact, today, all they said was that they're going to call a meeting with their provincial counterparts. No one is asking for a meeting, Vassy. We're asking for action, and yet they failed to show any leadership on that on behalf of Canadians, and it's very disappointing.
Mr. Noor Mohammed, final question to you, and it kind of jumps off there. I heard you kind of echo what Minister Lametti said today around the accusation that Conservatives are using this for political gain. Are you accusing the premiers of doing the same? Because they're also asking for reform.
I think what the premiers are asking for is a plan to work together, and that is exactly what
they're
we're
asking
going to do.
specifically for reforms.
They're asking for reform, and if you look at what they are asking for, this requires a conversation, because what BC is asking for may not be exactly what Ontario is asking for. And so to come up with a comprehensive plan together requires everybody to get into the same room and actually come up with real solutions.
But they're not playing politics. Is that what because you're saying the Conservatives are, but are you saying everyone who asks for bail reform?
No, I am saying that if there is a willingness to have a meaningful conversation, that's one thing. Saying repeal the legislation because you're soft on crime is actually quite the opposite. And if there is an opportunity to improve, and if Ms. Dancho has good suggestions, I know that Minister Mendocino and Minister Lametti would be open to those things. But the idea of saying that, you know, everything is a mess, everything is broken, certainly does not actually get to the heart of the problem, which is we need to be dealing with at its core. How do you prevent crime? How do you make sure there's supports for mental health and addictions? How do you support making sure judges have the tools to make the decisions? And most importantly, how do you ensure that police are well-resourced to ensure that people who are on bail not only meet their bail conditions, but if they do something wrong, that they are able to be arrested?
I know that you want to jump in. I'm out of time, unfortunately. I'm sure this will remain a discussion, though, for months to come. I appreciate you both making the time tonight. Talib Noor Mohammed and Raquel Dancho.